it's great to be with everyone here live, and I believe we're posting this online as well. So if you're watching the recording, it's nice to be with you as well. And I think you'll find that this topic and this area of human performance and engagement and getting the most out of people and driving results is something that I've got a lot of passion and energy for, and really in one way or another have been doing this my entire adult life, my entire career, which spans almost 2 decades now. But really, the idea of how do we get the most out of people, and I'll just give you a very brief background. I started off in my 20s speaking on college campuses and doing leadership development work and traveled to over 100 college campuses and probably did over 1,000 workshops in higher ed in my 20s. And because of that work, companies started asking me to come in. And believe it or not, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the theme was millennials in the workplace. And so organizations said, hey, all these new younger people are entering the workforce and they're radically different than us. And we weren't even like that in our 20s, and we don't know how to recruit them, develop them, retain them, manage them. It's this whole thing's just flipped upside down. And it really was a pretty radical change in the workplace. And so I started working with companies in developing strategies for really how to handle these younger people. And my classic line was to CEOs when I would do workshops was always, we can spend the next 3 hours trying to reshape your organization, or we can try to reshape an entire generation. You tell me what you'd like to do. But really the reason I challenged them that way was because there was a lot of resistance. And so look, my message was people are people, and you're not going to change the way they're hardwired. You're not going to change the way they were brought up. You're not going to change the way they were parented. So you either don't bring younger people into your workforce, which is an option, or if you need to or want to, then you've got to figure out strategies to be able to handle them. And so I think that's an important part of this is we have to adapt organizations to meet people where they are, meet 40-year-olds where they are, and 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds. And if you're in the service industry and you have 16-year-olds, you've got to be able to handle them too. But it's not easy because, as you all know, people are people and they're challenging and difficult. And so I spent my 20s just really the old brick and mortar consulting, and I did over 125 nights a year of business travel and got burned out and said enough of this and decided to teach myself online learning, which 12 years ago didn't really exist much. There was a little bit of stuff through higher ed. You had Blackboard and some of those legacy systems, but the idea of teaching content online and people taking on-demand content to learn was very, very early on. But I caught that wave at the right time and started building online courses and helping other subject matter experts bring their subject matter expertise to life, and created coursework and sold that in higher ed, sold it to companies. And so been in the development space, both in person and online now for close to 20 years. And this idea of engagement, I still don't think companies for the most part have been able to crack the code or solve it. Obviously, some organizations have tremendous engagement. They do a great job of building a culture where people care and they show up early and they stay late and they tell all their friends to come work at that organization, and they outperform. And the reality is that's very, very few and far between. So I very much look at engagement as equaling performance. And so why are we talking about employee engagement? Well, because when people are engaged, they perform. When people don't have their head in the game, they don't perform. And there's a ton of data that suggests that as well. And, I think about if I had to go in for open heart surgery, would I want the surgeon that was engaged in his work, or would I want the one that was in the midst of a messy divorce and may have had too much scotch the night before and had a shaky hand? So, I want someone that is focused, and that's what you want out of your team as well. You want people that are very focused in their work. I think as I'm listening to what everyone does, I think there's, two general use cases for why this information is important to you. One would be uh, you have someone that you're managing or working with. So I have a person on my team that I want to motivate her, and I want her to be inspired, and I want her to be engaged, and I want her to perform. Um, just a person. Or you may say, I'm walking into a role, or may walk into a role where there's a whole team of people that I'll be managing and supervising, and I want to get the most out of them. And there's one other use case, which would be you're consulting for a company. And, if for those of you that have done consulting or want to do consulting, at least in my experience, we often get dragged into things that are outside of our expertise or purview, but are great ways to deliver value to an organization. So, you may be a fractional CFO, but if you're able to advise the CEO on ways where they can drive engagement and they can drive better performance out of their people and get more of an ROI on the increasingly lofty salaries that are being paid, you're being of value, even if that's not the main reason that they brought you in to help. So, like Mark said, if you have questions, throw them in the chat box. I'll keep an eye out, but we can do some Q&A at the end. I'm just gonna share information that, again, I think is helpful for you, whether you're hands-on with people or you're providing value for other organizations that you're consulting with. The statistics that are out there on engagement, I'd say, are terrifying, to the point where the only way you'd believe them is if you saw them enough places and from enough reputable sources, and it's out there now. So the one that's most cited, Gallup, they estimate that about 33% of U.S. employees are engaged at work. 33%. So you walk into a company with 100 employees, and 33 of them are probably engaged. I've seen worse than that. I've seen better than that, but I don't think that that's going to be odd for you to see in an organization that you're working with or working for. Another terrifying part of this is that, by Gallup's estimation, 16% are what they call actively disengaged. The word that I often will use with those people are terrorists. And, well, Tom, why do you say that? Well, because they're in some cases actively trying to make the company worse, or they're trying to do damage, or they're trying to create distrust amongst people, or they're gossiping to the point where it's creating issues and dissension. So I mean, keep in mind, these are people that a company is paying $30,000, $50,000, $200,000 a year to, and they're actively disengaged in their work, which is pretty wild. But the other thing that I find a little bit terrifying is this is getting worse. So is this common? No. 20 years ago, these statistics were not as bad. They're trending worse. The United States has some of the worst trends in the world in employee engagement. So it's getting worse. Our country is about as bad as it is, which is just unbelievable. So what does engagement do? Well, it creates higher profitability. Again, we're talking about performance. Companies that have highly engaged teams are 21% more profitable. So yes, higher engagement equals higher performance, higher profitability, whatever measure you want to use. So if I'm looking at, how do we increase profits? Engagement has to be part of the equation. The SHRM, Society of Human Resource Managers, their estimation is that disengaged employees cost companies $550 billion with a B dollars per year. Um, Deloitte says that 79% of executives rate employee engagement as a top priority, but only 22% believe they're doing a good job. So, yeah, we hear this engagement thing. We know that engaged employees perform at a higher level, but only 1 in 5 of us actually thinks that we're doing a good job in this area. So I share this with you because I assume that most of you like numbers and feel comfortable with numbers, and I think that it really paints an interesting story and something that you may want to share with your clients and in the work you do as well. But you just think about that. Okay, if I have a team of 6 people and only 2 are engaged, what does that look like at an organization? Well, it looks bad. And as you guys know, salaries aren't going down. And that's one of the big things that I'm around this every day. So, my company provides outsourced HR. So we bring like a Fortune 1000 HR department down to the small to medium sized business. And so I see salaries, I see job descriptions, and I'm still shocked often at what the going rate is for certain positions in certain industries, in certain markets. So as these salaries go up, some may say it's in line with inflation. Others may say that it's significantly higher. I still have trouble wrapping my arms around what certain people are paid for certain roles. But you look at that and then you say, hey, there's a coin flip whether or not they're engaged in their work. I just think that's a really hard thing to reconcile. And I look at that and say, well, can a company be profitable paying this many people this amount of money, knowing that the performance across the board is probably not going to blow people away? So that's just a part of this that I think's pretty important. Now, you may have heard this before, but I'll just share that engagement is not the foosball table in the corner or the half day Fridays where you get to wear jeans. Another thing that engagement is not, and I see this mistake quite a bit. And look, as a manager of people myself, I've made this mistake multiple times. Pay raises do not drive engagement. I'm going to completely make up a statistic, but I'll say that pay raises drive engagement for about 72 hours. You give someone a raise on Friday and they might have a little more pep in their step on Monday, but by the end of next week, it's the same performance. It does not change performance. So, foosball tables and pay raises and come wear jeans on Friday, and we're going to put out a snow cone truck out in the parking lot for you guys to enjoy. It doesn't make a difference. And if it does, we're talking hours, not sustainably. So what this is about is, helping people feel aligned to the organization, helping them feel valued, helping them feel like they're being developed, helping them feel like there's a sense of trust. And, a few things that people are really looking for. The first thing is, clarity. And they want to know what to do and why it matters. Years ago, I used to call this a 360-degree view of the organization. But how do we teach someone very early on, here's what we do here, here's what you're going to be doing, here's why it matters. And if they feel like what they're doing matters, it changes their entire level of engagement. I've used the analogy of the receptionist that sits in front of the building. Okay, so she sits at the front desk. They've got a lot of people coming in for meetings and clients or customers or vendors or whatever it might be. And so she's making that first impression. And if you explain to her the importance of someone feeling warmth when they walk in the building, and the importance of first impressions, and the importance of cleanliness in the open area, and offering someone a cold or warm beverage when they come in, and greeting them with a smile, and coming around the desk to shake their hand, and all these little things. And if you train someone on how to do that, and then you explain that the people walking into our building are potentially spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars with us, or they're deciding if they want to be a client or if they want to be a patient of ours, and we want their business and we want repeat business. And if we can drive referrals and recommendations and we can sign big contracts, it's going to have a tremendous impact on our organization. Well, when you explain that role in that way, and then you train someone on how to do that, guess what happens? You have a rock star of an employee. You have someone that really feels committed to the organization, to the cause. And even their, what some people would call a relatively insignificant and lower wage position, it feels meaningful to them. Then the second thing we want to do is provide people with growth opportunities. Now, not everyone wants to grow. Some people say, look, I'm making a comfortable wage. My partner makes a comfortable wage as well. We keep our expenses low. I'm good. I don't want more responsibility. I don't need more money. So it's not about forcing everyone to go up the ladder and thinking something is wrong with them if they don't want to, but just making sure that the right people have the opportunity to get whatever they need. When you have that young, ambitious go-getter that wants to run the company someday, give her the opportunities on how to do that, create the path to that. But that's why we have those regular check-ins. Organizations need to promote recognition consistently, small things. These programs like Employee of the Week or rewarding people for embodying certain behaviors. I think about the college football teams that give the stickers on the helmet when someone makes a good play. There's a reason why those things occur. It's because people are people and they're actually motivated by it. They actually respond well to it. So how do we give people the recognition, even if the CEO says, yeah, who cares about a Starbucks gift card and me mentioning their name at the quarterly all hands meeting? Well, they care because they're a human being and they're proud of it and they're going to go home and brag about it, or they'll go on LinkedIn and brag about it. And then they'll go tell their friends at happy hour who are also high quality people that could be a great referral source to come work for the company if they had that in place. So that's where we create some momentum here. And then, another really important part of this, and this is in some ways, it's the biggest problem I see, and it's the biggest opportunity for improvement inside an organization, is the quality and the strength of relationships with managers. So you've probably heard the stories and the anecdotes and the statistics. The number one reason why people leave an organization is because of their relationship or lack thereof with their immediate supervisor. People leave because they think their boss is an idiot. People leave because their boss doesn't respond to them quick enough. People leave because their boss never gives positive feedback and only gives negative feedback. Or weeks or months go by and they don't communicate at all with their boss, or their boss never asks about their weekend. So people leave managers. But people also stay because of managers. People get engaged because of managers. So, I'll share a little bit of a framework later, but the idea is if we can teach managers how to coach and manage and mentor and lead at a high level, it will absolutely drive performance. And, one of Gallup's interesting pieces was 70% of employee engagement variance is traced to the manager. 70% of the variance is traced to the manager. And again, this isn't, being a manager is not rocket science. Being a manager is just having a simple framework, but most organizations don't provide a framework for managers. So what happens when there's disengagement? Well, when someone is disengaged, they leave. Now, what are turnover costs? I'm sure some or many of you have run this analysis for certain positions at certain companies. The metrics are across the board. I've seen 33% of salary. I've seen 500% of salary. I don't know what it is, and it obviously depends on the role in the organization. But let's just split the difference and say it's 100%. So to turn over a $30,000 role, it's 30,000. To turn over a $100,000 role, it's 100,000. And even if it's half those numbers, they're still staggering. Um, Turnover is killing companies. Lost productivity is killing companies. So we pay someone $60,000, they're 60% engaged. Well, that means that we're losing $24,000 of productivity. Now, one of the wild things that I still have trouble getting over, we were discussing this morning with one of our clients. I can't believe how few organizations have meaningful performance metrics for each role. So someone is disengaged. How do we know? How do we know they're not performing? How do we know the real cost of turnover? How do we know the ROI? I mean, I read this in a book years ago, and I've always followed it. I certainly subscribe to it. You know, each organization, or I'm sorry, each role in an organization has a cost, and there should be an ROI. If I'm paying someone $80,000, is that too little? Is it too much? I can't answer that until I know what value they're producing. If I'm paying someone $80,000 and they're driving $300,000 of value to the organization, I'm going to give them a pay raise. I'm going to give them more vacation. I'm going to make sure they stay forever. And I'm going to say, who are your friends that are just like you that should be working here? At the same time, if I'm paying someone $60,000 and they're driving $40,000 of value to the company, what are we really doing here? Is that even a full-time role? Is this person need a better management and training and mentorship? Are they just the wrong fit? Should this role even exist in the company? Should we outsource it at half the cost? And these are some of the conversations that I'm sure you're in or want to be in organizations, and they're tough conversations to have. But I just see a lot of organizations that, for whatever reason, don't have an adult in the room to ask these questions. I think companies avoid it. I think companies are often held hostage by people, meaning, well, Mary's been here forever and you can't get rid of her. She knows so much information about our clients. So these people sometimes hold you hostage because you think you can't live without them. I've seen. I remember this was a recent company that I was talking to, and they had someone that was a horrible culture fit. Nobody wanted to be around her. She had been there forever. She knew some information and client information that they felt like if we replace her, it'll walk out the door. And she basically held them hostage. And my question was, well, I had a statement that I questioned. My statement was, you understand this person is stealing a paycheck from you, right? And, the leaders of the organization kind of nodded their head. And I said, how long has she been doing this? And the answer was 20 years. So you can do the math, 20 years of making whatever. Now, I said, I already know the answer to this question, but let me guess that you've bumped up her pay every single year for 20 years, and she's probably making more money than I can even imagine that someone like her should be making. And they said, well, yeah. Well, you bump her up, cost of living 5% here, good year here, maybe it's 10%. It's just making a lot of money to do nothing. And so I believe someone needs to ask these questions. And if I were you, I would politely challenge companies. And a word that I like is carefrontational. So there's a caring way to be confrontational and say, look, it's not my responsibility, yours or mine, to fire people or to do any of these things, but I am going to ask you tough questions because we're here to make money. We're here to generate a profit. That means that we need each contributor to be driving value to the organization. And if someone is not driving value, if we're not getting a positive ROI, then what are we doing here? Are we okay employing people that we're losing money on? Are we okay with people hiding out and stealing a paycheck? Are we okay with people that are a horrible culture fit but performing at an adequate level. And again, these are not questions that you can answer or I can answer, but we can ask them. And I think if we want to be a trusted advisor to an organization, we have to be willing to ask these questions and challenge people. Um, it, let's just sequentially look at this for a second here. So I see very few companies that I would say do the basics of here is each role inside our organization. Here are the clear expectations for this role. Here is how we measure success with these roles. I more often than not, I see a little bit of this or none of this, or we did this 10 years ago, but it's no longer accurate. So, and this is the entire employee life cycle because this is going to define how we compensate this role. It's going to define how we describe this role in a job description. It's going to define how we interview people to see if they're the right fit for this role, how we do our performance reviews, how we bonus or compensate these people, how we determine if we're getting an ROI on these people. But when you don't have that basic clarity, we're winging it. We're guessing. We're paying people what our competitors are paying, whether that's right or not. I can't speak to this in other markets. I know in Arizona, this was, maybe a year or two into COVID, and some of you may remember this, salaries just started getting really goofy. All right. And you'd ask a company, why are you paying this? Well, because our competitors are paying this. And I said, well, are you able to make money if you're paying that much to this role? And the answer was no. I said, well, why in the hell would you do it then? I said, if your competitors are overpaying for talent, then why not just ride this out? Because it'll correct itself. And then there were layoffs and I mean, you have to, again, there's value in knowing what your competitors are paying, but I see companies that obsess over this. Well, I'm going to read the job description, I'm going to see what our competitors are paying, and I'm going to pay more, or I'm going to pay the same. And it's, well, can you make money doing that? Can you get an ROI doing that? So that's why it's so important to have those. This is the job. This is what we're paying. This is how we're measuring success, and really dig your feet in of this is what works in our organization. Um, I mentioned this before, but we need to make sure that we have a culture where people are coaching. So I often talk about managers in this day and age, get that word out of your vernacular. They have to show up as coaches. They need to provide real-time feedback. They need to provide development opportunities. The days of the annual review, not that you can't have those, but it now needs to be daily reviews, real-time feedback, regular one-to-ones every single week. Especially younger people, they need that frequent, specific, actionable feedback. If they don't get that, they quit caring. They become disengaged. They don't know if they're valued around there. Um, so I think that, again, these things aren't going to happen by accident. We have to be very deliberate. And, does our organization have regular check-ins, regular team meetings, regular pulse surveys on engagement? And if those things don't occur on a regular basis, all hell can and probably will break loose. So to whatever degree you can help systematize some of these things and explain the value of some of these things, you know, this is where, my work comes into play around the HR space is, as you can probably imagine, I see companies that don't believe in HR. I see companies that have their CFO or controller do HR. I have companies where the CEO's spouse does HR part-time for them. But when you're not putting these things into place, it's very difficult to get people swimming in the right direction and performing at an optimal level. I mean, something as basic as weekly check-ins, right? Oh, well, doesn't everyone do weekly check-ins? No, oftentimes they don't. But when managers have weekly check-ins with their team, there's a 3x multiple on how likely they are to be engaged. So just saying, Steve, I'm working with you. I'm gonna, I'm your manager. We're gonna speak on a weekly basis, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. We're gonna see how I can help you out, what you need, what you're working on, any roadblocks you're facing. We're gonna look at your performance metrics just to make sure that you're on target to have a great year or great month or however we measure that. Just by me doing that, there's a 3 time likelihood of you being engaged. Now, am I being a world class coach? Am I? No, I'm just a nice person that's seeing how I can help you and being a servant leader. And so companies, you know this. It's a the old adage of we're going to take our top performer and we're going to make her a manager. And then she struggles as a manager because no one told her how to manage, and it all falls apart. So manager development is such a huge opportunity here. So I'm gonna wrap up just with a closing thought, and then any questions, comments, thoughts that you have, we can blurt them out. We can use the chat box. I'm curious, what other questions or thoughts I can provide. But in terms of growing an organization, I just find that engagement is a absolutely hidden but incredibly valuable growth strategy, to reduce turnover, to boost productivity, to give a better client or customer experience. And this stuff doesn't happen by accident. It has to be incredibly intentional. It has to be hardwired into the DNA of the organization. And when you get this right, it absolutely has a positive effect on the P&L of an organization. So let me pause there. Questions, thoughts, and let's see what else we can cover here. And I hope this has been beneficial for you so far.
Oh, that's great. And I do have a question here, one that just came in from Simha, and it is there a preferred methodology to perform annual reviews to develop standards since most companies have a terrible process? And I know from my own experience in a lot of different companies and just over the years, I would agree with your sentiments on that by and large. There are terrible processes in a lot of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, step one is doing it. I can't tell you how often people leave companies because they don't receive regular feedback. Their head goes into the worst possible space, which is people don't value me around here or like me, so I'm going to leave. So just making sure that there is a regular cadence. And annual reviews, like the big annual review, is perfectly fine. But then there also has to be those regular pulse checks. So, you know, the problem, the problem with the annual review, there's a lot of problems, but one is a year is a really long period of time, especially when you skew to younger people who have lower attention spans. They're used to instant feedback, instant gratification because of technology, because of social media. So when they don't hear for a week or a month straight that they are doing a good job and they're loved, they feel like they hate me around here and I'm going to disengage. So just because of human nature, there has to be that regular feedback given. The other problem is, and this is a whole different topic, but it does relate. People are becoming, and this probably won't shock anyone here, people are becoming increasingly anxious. And as you have a more anxious group of employees, they can't handle the idea of once a year, James is going to rate my performance. And I have no idea what he's going to say. I don't know if it's positive or negative. I don't know if I'm getting fired or not. I don't know if I'm getting a raise. This anxiety builds up in them. And they can't sleep, they can't focus on work, all because we're waiting until the annual review to give them that feedback. So that's another reason why it just has to be a weekly cadence of every single week, you know, what's going well? What do you need my help with? What performance metrics can we review? Um, how many calls did you make? How many dollars did you bring in? What was your satisfaction rate from the customers that you're doing customer service for? Whatever that might be. And if we're doing that on a regular basis, again, looking at performance metrics, seeing what's going well, seeing what's not going well. And then also, in there from a manager standpoint, every week when we talk, I'm going to tell you one thing you're doing well and one thing you can improve, because now I'm normalizing negative feedback so that, James, every week you're going to hear from me something that you could do better. So it's not going to upset you. It's not going to hurt your feelings. It's not going to feel like it's coming out of left field. You're not going to have to wait till the end of the year for me to say it. I'm just going to coach you and share that with you. And because we normalize it, now people are engaged in it and they look forward to it, as opposed to being scared about when it's coming. So, that's it. A lot of these HR platforms have these things built in, but it's like any other tool, you have to use it. So, those regular reviews, and then of course giving managers that cadence. So I mean, what I'm describing here, we're talking about like 4 or 5 bullet points. And so that's where Steve's a new manager. He's never managed before. He's a great guy, but he's young and he hasn't managed. So what I need to do is give him a 4-step framework on how to manage the 6 people on his team. And oh, by the way, because he was on someone's team prior, he's already familiar with that four-step framework because his manager was managing him that way. But so much of this is when you don't have SOPs, when you don't have frameworks in place, what do people do? They make up their own process. They go to ChatGPT and figure something out. Well, how can we drive efficiency and profitability and engagement in our organization if 8 managers are managing 8 different ways? It just falls apart. And so boring frameworks and SOPs are what drive results, not, hey, let's all be creative and make up our own process.
Did we
Uh,
cover your question on that, Suma?
we did, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how do you create those standards that are applied across the board so that even the terrible manager who's never had an opportunity to really learn how to do reviews and give constructive feedback or deliver criticism in the right way, like there's a gap in the knowledge base across the board, both from the people receiving the criticism or review and the people trying to give that because they don't know either. And so the standards that you're talking about have to come from someplace, and usually the organization doesn't have somebody or a process to work with. It may use ChatGPT for the standard for the company, and nobody really wants to do it because they believe it's a waste of time. So, like, how do you infuse that kind of discipline within the organization, or is it even possible?
So it's a training issue, and training is not necessarily exciting or sexy to the CEO. It's something that sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't happen. Hey, we got to cut our training budget. For a company, especially above 50, above 100 employees, I mean, you have to have some type of I often call it a knowledge center. Some people have called it an intranet or a internal university. But the first thing that, from a training standpoint, the first thing that I often will do with a company is I'll start with the org chart. Okay, so who's everyone in the company? What do they do? Who do they report to? How do you silo the different departments of the organization? Okay, now each of those roles, what are they responsible for? What are the 5 to 10 things that that person in that role is responsible for? Now I have to train them and this is the important part, this is the answer to your question, I have to train them on how to do those things. So as a manager, you're responsible for doing one-to-ones with every single person on your team every single week. Great. What is a one-to-one? How do I show up? What is the framework for that? And if you tell everyone what they have to do, how they do it, how they're being measured, that's the answer to your question. But if that doesn't exist, or it's sitting in a folder somewhere. So, Steve, welcome to the company. You're an account manager. Here's the 10 things that you're responsible for. Here's how to do all 10 of those things. Here's your employee handbook. Here's the mission, vision, values of the company. Now you've received great onboarding. So you're engaged and you know what you need to do. And when you forget how to do something, you go back to our knowledge center. When you get promoted into a new role, we start all over with your responsibilities and how to do all those things. But a lot of times this just doesn't exist. And so when it doesn't exist, you're hoping it rubs off on people, and then another layer to this, as you can imagine, is it's even worse when everyone's remote, because now, okay, I'm new to the company, I don't know how to do anything. James sits over there, I walk over and I ask him. Now, am I gonna pick up the phone and call him and ask him? No, I'm not, because that's just not how people behave. So, you have to teach people the basics. You have to do it immediately. You have to do it in a way where they're able to understand it, process it, refer back to it. I could talk for hours about training, but also providing training that teaches people the way they want to learn. So the way I would design training for a catering company that hires seasonal college students is going to look a lot different than me training engineers that are mid-career. So understanding your audience and providing information to them, in a way where they'll actually retain it and be able to do it.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great question.
Tom, I guess a question that I kind of got out of the talk you gave so far, just curious, it struck me. It seems like what's missing in a lot of this, and maybe it's the accountant in me, is how do you measure someone's engagement? How are there forums out there? Is that what you try to encourage with your clients? Is that they come up with a way to create some sort of score that they can track to?
Yeah,
I remember.
there's a lot
Go
of
ahead. I'm sorry.
great software out there that can do that. You could create something yourself for free, and
Mhm.
just push out a survey, and say, here's 15 questions and I just want people's answers. But there's some really good engagement survey software out there. It's also baked into a lot of the HR platforms, but just doing it. So every month engagement survey, or at least every quarter, and then we can benchmark. We can see who's unhappy or not happy, proactively as opposed to reactively. The engagement survey is not going to solve everything, but a someone indicates less engagement in their engagement survey. So then I go to their supervisor and I say, what's going on? And they go, come to think of it, their head really hasn't been in the game. Well, let's solve that now versus letting that person coast along for another few years. So it's just a matter of doing those surveys on a regular cadence. I believe monthly or quarterly. I think annual, it's just way too much time. Business moves so fast now.
I was going to say one of the things that I guess it was fortunate in public accounting. I was with one of the large firms. We, as new staff members in the accounting staff, we would get um, evaluated on each engage. We would call them engagements, each client, which was generally anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. So oftentimes we were getting in the course of a year, we were maybe getting 8 or 10 evaluations of how we did. And we had different, we oftentimes worked for different supervisors on those various engagements, might even have different roles in terms of um, the specific work we were doing might be a little bit different on each of those engagements. So it gave us a good opportunity not only to work for different people, but to get a lot of feedback. As you said, I think that's really important, especially for the new employees, younger employees that are just trying to figure their way out in an organization. And maybe as we get older, a little more set in our ways or that sort of thing, where the job becomes more of a management role rather than just specific duties, we can get away with longer stretches of time before we have to have an formal evaluation.
Sure, sure. And you know, another piece of this is it's, you talked about the communication, and it sometimes it gets lost of employees are people, and people need to communicate. They need to communicate on a regular basis. And I just think that sometimes when we're sitting in a boardroom, we forget that. And I've had to, I've had difficult conversations with CEOs where I've said, how would you feel if your daughter was being treated the way you're treating your employees? And you can almost see their blood boiling, because they'd be furious. They'd tell their daughter to leave the company they were at. They would tell their daughter to march into the CEO's office and complain. Well, why are your people any different? And even if selfishly you say, well, I don't care about my employees like I care about my daughter, okay. Well, you do care about, and this was something that was brought up earlier, you do care about the value of your company. You do care about the financial performance of your company. So, what's the best way to get people to drive the most value for your company? You want them engaged. You want them to care. You want them to feel loved. I mean, it's all the softy feely stuff that I know it's fun to say, who cares? Just go to work and do your job. And you know what? Frankly, that probably worked on baby boomers. It doesn't fly anymore. You just can't do it. So, if selfishly all I care about is being as profitable as possible so I can sell my company in the next 3 to 5 years for maximum value, what am I focused on? I'm focused on getting people to perform at the highest level possible. And I want the best possible ROI on my people as I can get. So that's why I have to do the things we're talking about. Because if you just try to roll with an iron fist and yell and scream, and it stopped working. I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, probably.
I have a question here. I guess in a couple of my roles, I was responsible for HR, so I was hurt by your earlier comment about CFOs not knowing what they're doing. But
No. Half our clients come in because a CFO says someone threw HR at me and I don't have time for it or don't want to do it or don't feel I'm the best person to do it. So it wasn't that it can't be done. It's more of it becomes a throwaway thing. It's tough to ignore or do as a secondary thought if you want to develop a performance culture.
I was just kind of kidding about that.
I
But
know, I know.
at the last company I was at, we went with a PEO because we got in and there was no HR and we very much thought we were at risk for various things. But employee engagement wasn't really what they spent time with. So I guess the question is how do you drive kind of an outsourced HR to help you address employee engagement? What questions do you ask? What expectations do you set for them?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, a PEO is going to do the bare minimum, and that's okay if that's all you think you need. But to your point, if you're looking at meaningful job descriptions and having great interviews and recruiting talent and developing training and measuring employee engagement. Those are the things that they either don't do or they do at a very, very poor level in my experience. So, the real idea here is developing a people strategy that helps the company execute how they want to execute. And typically in HR, whether it's a PEO or an HR person, there's a pretty significant disconnect. And so I like sitting down with the owner of the company, the CEO of the company, the management team of the company, and just say, what are we trying to do around here? How are we trying to perform? What type of culture do we want? What does success look like? What characteristics do your most talented, best people embody? Like getting an idea of that. And then you start at the beginning and you say, okay, how do we develop job descriptions that align with what you're trying to create? And then an interview process, and then an onboarding experience, and training, and management, and comp packages, and bonuses that all align with that. But that's a very people-centric strategy that is much different than onboarding, offboarding, compliance, reprimands. So the answer is really around finding people that can do what the organization wants to do. And it's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. It is very, very difficult to do, but if you want to, build a great organization, that's what you have to do. It's just not going to be from blocking and tackling in HR.
Thanks.
James, did you have a question?
I did, Mark, and Tom actually kind of answered it for me. But as I think through this whole thing, the worst thing you can have is a bad hire. I mean, that's where 95% of the problems start right there. So you can have the best training, best cultural scenario ever, but if you have a bad hire that doesn't fit the culture, and a lot of people just can't lead and hire people, period. They suck at it. I'll just be brutally
Yeah.
honest. And so is there a way for you to go to owners and say, okay, look, let's you talked about the org chart, which is great. Do you do like almost a person by person analysis and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Owner, can we talk about each of these individuals and what's your thoughts? Why were they hired? Was it a backfill that they just needed a warm body to fill a chair and do a basic job? Like, explain that process on the hiring side, because if you do that right, you're going to avoid like a lot of problems down the road, period.
So I'll share a quick story with you. The first consulting gig I ever had, I was speaking on college campuses. A family friend back in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, he was CEO of a large publicly traded company in Pittsburgh. And around the holidays, he pulled me aside. He said, I know you're doing all this work on college campuses, and we're having a really hard time recruiting younger engineers in our organization. We're paying them $80,000 a year plus a $20,000 signing bonus, but we're wrong a lot. We make bad hires and we cannot figure out what in the heck is going on. And I said, Terry, I don't know if I can help you. Let me do it. And if I don't help you, please don't pay me anything. If I do provide you value, you can pay me for my time. And he said, okay. So I go in there, and this is still the process to this day I use. But I went in there and I said, okay, give me your top performers. Let me just understand them. Their characteristics, where they're from, just everything. Let me understand that. And then I'll compare that to everything else. And I went through this process. Again, this is 20 years ago, so it's like paper, pencil. It's all being done manually. I'm housed in their conference room. I'm talking to a bunch of people, reviewing whatever data from HR I could get, and it became so incredibly obvious. So all of their best hires were coming from branch campuses. So they weren't coming from Pitt and Penn State and Ohio State. They were coming from community colleges, Penn State, Erie, Pitt, Johnstown. And what we figured out was these kids are gritty. They're first generation college students. They work their way through college. They have the will to be successful. They have the work ethic. And he's like, yeah, that's the culture we want around here. And I said, okay, then only recruit those kids. So in your job descriptions, in your interviews, in everything you do, attract those kids and scare the hell out of the wrong ones. And HR, you know, they looked like a ghost when I shared this because they spent half the damn year on these big college campuses recruiting all these kids. And I said, all the ones you're recruiting at these job fairs are horrible hires. They're entitled. They don't work as hard. They don't embody the blue collar culture that you want around here. And so I still do that. And I mean, James, I'll work with like an insurance company and, high turnover, tough to find good salespeople. And I'm like, all right, let's just give me your 5 best, your 10 best. And what are the common characteristics? What do they have? Okay, let's just go after them. Because so often these companies, they think they can change people. They think they can mold people. And yes, over the course of 20 years, maybe there's a handful of people that they rescued and they saved and they helped. But for the most part, you can't change the way people are hardwired. So figuring out what our top performers have in common, what is the culture and characteristics we want of the organization? There's a company I work here locally, and communication is so important. So they measure communication. How do people fill out their job application? How do people communicate during the process? They just do these stupid, meaningless activities during the interview process just to see how people communicate. And then they feel very confident with that. So it's a tough exercise, but it's really, really important. And James, a lot of times what this discovers is it's things that sometimes you would have never thought about. They needed to play sports growing up. They need to be raised by a single parent. We do really well with hiring veterans, but specifically from the Navy. I mean, I've seen so many of these random things where, I had a medical device company in Southern California, D1 athletes. That was it. They only hired D1 athletes, and they did really, really well with it.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, Tom. And you mentioned Gallup several times. I used to work for Stryker MedTech, and
Yeah.
we spent millions of dollars with Gallup, with especially with our sales folks in that certain your type of methodology, with both our internal folks and our sales folks. So, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. But thanks for your answer. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks.